In an upscale California wedding venue, a 68-year-old grandmother was about to face the most devastating public humiliation of her life. What started as a joyful family celebration took a shocking turn when she came face to face with her daughter-in-law's true nature. Avery Cole wasn't your typical retired grandmother. For over 4 decades, she had spent her life as a financial advisor hunting down fraud and protecting clients from financial predators. Known for her razor-sharp analytical mind and uncompromising pursuit of justice. Skills that would soon transform her from victim to hunter in a game her daughter-in-law never saw coming. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Avery Cole adjusted her navy silk dress one final time as she stepped out of her silver Honda Accord, the California sun casting golden shadows across the manicured grounds of the Meadowbrook Country Club. At 68, she still carried herself with the poise of a woman who had spent decades commanding boardrooms, though the past 3 years had softened her edges in ways both visible and invisible. Today felt different, hopeful even. Tommy's wedding represented more than just her grandson's happiness. It was a chance for the family to heal, to move forward from the dark period that had followed her husband Frank's death. The venue sparkled with understated elegance, white roses and eucalyptus adorning every surface, while string lights created a warm canopy over the reception area. Avery had helped with some of the planning, contributing both financially and emotionally to ensure Tommy's day would be perfect. She'd even prepared a few words for a potential toast, though she'd kept that to herself, not wanting to assume she'd be asked to speak. "Grandma Avery!" Tommy's voice cut through the gentle murmur of arriving guests. Her grandson, handsome in his charcoal tuxedo, bounded toward her with the enthusiasm that had made him her closest confidant during Frank's final months. His embrace was genuine, lasting longer than the polite hugs she'd grown accustomed to from the rest of the family. "You look absolutely radiant," she whispered against his ear, meaning every word. At 26, Tommy had Frank's gentle eyes and David's stubborn chin, but his warmth was entirely his own. "I'm so glad you're here," he said, stepping back but keeping his hands on her shoulders. "Claire's grandmother is already asking about your famous financial planning stories. She heard you helped the Hendersons save their farm back in the 80s. Avery felt a flutter of pride mixed with surprise. She hadn't realized her old professional reputation still carried weight in these social circles. "Well, perhaps I'll have a chance to chat with her later." As Tommy was swept away by other well-wishers, Avery made her way toward the cocktail hour, nodding to familiar faces and accepting congratulations on her grandson's behalf. The September afternoon was perfect, neither too warm nor too cool, and she found herself relaxing for the first time in months. "Avery, darling." Margaret Henderson, an old client turned friend, approached with genuine enthusiasm. "Tommy told us you're the one who suggested the acoustic trio. They're absolutely lovely." "Oh, that's very kind. I just thought—" "Excuse me." Jessica's voice cut through their conversation like a blade wrapped in silk. Avery's daughter-in-law appeared beside them, resplendent in a form-fitting emerald dress that probably cost more than Avery's monthly grocery budget. "Margaret, I hate to interrupt, but I was hoping to steal you away to meet Claire's parents. They're very interested in your husband's wine collection." The dismissal was subtle but unmistakable. Margaret, ever the diplomat, smiled at both women. "Of course, dear." "Avery, we'll continue our chat later." Left standing alone, Avery watched Jessica guide Margaret away with practiced efficiency. It was a small slight, easily overlooked, but it stung nonetheless. Jessica had a talent for making Avery feel invisible at family gatherings, relegating her to the margins while positioning herself as the family's social coordinator. The cocktail hour continued with similar small cruelties. When Avery shared a story about Tommy's childhood with a group of Claire's relatives, Jessica appeared with urgent news about seating arrangements that required their immediate attention. When an old colleague of Frank's asked about Avery's consulting work, Jessica smoothly redirected the conversation to David's recent promotion, somehow managing to make Avery's 40-year career seem quaint by comparison. She certainly knows how to work a room, murmured Dr. Sarah Cole, Avery's daughter, appearing at her elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. She's nervous about everything going perfectly, Avery replied diplomatically, though the excuse tasted bitter. It's her first time planning something this elaborate. Sarah's expression suggested she wasn't buying the generous interpretation, but she simply clinked her glass against her mother's. To family, she said quietly. To family, Avery echoed, though the word felt increasingly hollow. The reception dinner began with speeches, and Avery's heart swelled as Tommy took the microphone. Her grandson's voice carried clearly across the elegant ballroom as he thanked his parents, his new in-laws, and the guests who had traveled to celebrate with them. I want to thank both of my grandmothers, Tommy continued, his gaze finding Avery's table. Grandma Avery, you taught me that integrity isn't just about being honest. It's about being brave enough to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Grandma Helen, thank you for showing me that grace and kindness never go out of style. The applause was warm and genuine, and for a moment, Avery felt tears prick her eyes. This was what she had hoped for. Recognition, belonging, the acknowledgement that she still had value to contribute to her family's story. But as the clapping died down, she caught sight of Jessica's face. Her daughter-in-law's smile had turned brittle, her jaw tight with barely concealed irritation. The attention and praise directed toward Avery seemed to rankle her in a way that was both puzzling and troubling. The evening continued with dinner and dancing, and Avery found herself genuinely enjoying conversations with Claire's extended family and several of Tommy's college friends. Her professional background proved to be an excellent conversation starter, and she found herself dispensing gentle financial advice and sharing stories from her decades in the field. It was during one such conversation, she was explaining compound interest to a young couple just starting their careers, when Jessica's voice rang out across their table, pitched loud enough to carry to neighboring tables. Oh, Avery, you're not boring these poor children with your ancient investment strategies, are you? Jessica's laugh was bright and sharp. I mean, the market has changed so dramatically since your day. These kids need modern advice, not something from the Stone Age of finance. The young couple looked uncomfortable, glancing between the two women uncertainly. Avery felt heat rise in her cheeks but maintained her composure. I was just sharing some basic principles that tend to remain consistent across market changes. Principles, Jessica repeated, her voice dripping with condescension. Yes, well, I suppose when you've been out of the game as long as you have, principles are all you have left to offer. The silence that followed was deafening. Avery could feel the weight of dozens of gazes, the conversations at nearby tables grinding to a halt as guests sensed the tension. David, seated 2 tables away, looked stricken, but made no move to intervene. But Jessica wasn't finished. Perhaps emboldened by the champagne, or perhaps simply tired of pretending, she leaned forward with a smile that could have cut glass. You know what, Avery? I think it's time we were honest about something. Her voice carried clearly across the suddenly quiet reception hall. You are dead weight in this family, worthless dead weight. Tommy and David and Sarah, they all tiptoe around your feelings because they feel sorry for you. But the truth is, you should fade into the background where old people belong. Nobody wants to hear your outdated opinions or your sad stories about Frank. It's time you accepted that your moment has passed and stopped trying to be relevant. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Avery felt the blood drain from her face, felt the collective intake of breath from the 150 guests who had just witnessed her complete and utter humiliation. Children stopped running between tables. The band's music seemed to falter. Even the servers paused in their choreographed movements. For a moment that felt like an eternity, Avery sat frozen, her champagne glass halfway to her lips, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. The woman she had tried so hard to accept, to welcome into their family despite their differences, had just eviscerated her in front of everyone who mattered. Tommy's face was a mask of shock and rage. But before he could speak, Avery stood slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. She set down her champagne glass with a steady hand and smiled, a small, dignified smile that revealed nothing of the devastation roiling inside her. Excuse me, she said quietly, her voice carrying despite its softness. I think I need some air. She walked out of that ballroom with her head high and her back straight, every eye following her progress. But the moment she reached her car in the darkened parking lot, the facade crumbled. Avery Cole, who had survived her husband's death and rebuilt her life from the ashes of grief, sat behind the wheel of her sensible Honda and wept like a broken-hearted child. The sobs came from somewhere deep and primal, 3 years of careful healing undone in less than 3 minutes. But as the tears began to subside, something else took their place. Something cold and calculating that she hadn't felt since her days of hunting down financial predators who thought they could steal from her clients. Jessica had revealed her true nature tonight, and in doing so, she had awakened something in Avery that had been dormant far too long. If her daughter-in-law wanted to play games of power and humiliation, then perhaps it was time she learned what a real financial predator looked like. The drive home passed in a blur of streetlights and stop signs, Avery's hands gripping the steering wheel with mechanical precision, while her mind replayed Jessica's words on an endless, torturous loop. Worthless dead weight. Fade into the background where old people belong. Each repetition felt like a fresh wound, salt ground into her carefully reconstructed sense of self-worth. Her modest ranch-style home in the Carmichael suburbs welcomed her with familiar shadows, and the lingering scent of the lavender sachets Frank had always loved. She'd kept them in the dresser drawers, a small act of defiance against the well-meaning friends who insisted she needed to move on and, quote, make the house her own. Tonight, surrounded by 42 years of shared memories, she felt more alone than she had since the day Frank died. Avery sat at her kitchen table still wearing her navy dress, staring at the half-finished crossword puzzle she'd abandoned that morning. The normalcy of it, the coffee rings staining the newspaper, the pencil worn down to a nub, seemed absurd after what had just happened. How could the world look exactly the same when her place in it had been so completely redefined? Sleep was impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Jessica's triumphant smile, heard the collective gasp of the wedding guests, felt the weight of David's silence. At 2:17 a.m., she gave up and made coffee, her hands trembling slightly as she measured the grounds. The simple routine helped ground her, but it couldn't quiet the storm in her mind. It was then, in the harsh fluorescent glow of her kitchen light, that the financial advisor in her began to surface. Jessica's attack had been calculated, public, and devastating, but it had also been revealing. The woman who had just destroyed her had been drinking expensive champagne all evening, wearing a dress that probably cost more than most people's mortgage payments, and planning what appeared to be an elaborate honeymoon to Italy, based on the conversations Avery had overheard. David was successful, certainly, but not wealthy enough to support the lifestyle Jessica seemed to enjoy without question. He'd been promoted to senior partner at his law firm 8 months ago, achievement that should have brought financial relief, not the stress lines Avery had noticed etched around his eyes lately. Her phone buzzed against the granite countertop, startling her from her thoughts. Tommy's name appeared on the screen, and despite everything, her heart lifted slightly. "Grandma? I know it's late, but I couldn't sleep. I needed to call you." "Oh, sweetheart?" Her voice cracked, despite her best efforts. "You should be with your wife, not worrying about—" "Don't." Tommy's voice was fierce. "Don't you dare apologize for what she did. Claire and I are both furious." Half the guests left early after that scene. Her own family looked mortified. "It's fine, Tommy. I'm fine." The lie came automatically, a protective instinct she'd developed over years of not wanting to burden her family with her problems. "No, it's not fine. And you're not fine." What Jessica did was unforgivable. Tommy paused, and she could hear voices in the background. Claire, probably, offering comfort and solidarity. "Dad should have said something. Should have done something. I don't understand why he just sat there." Neither did Avery, but saying so would only deepen Tommy's disappointment in his father. "Your father was in shock. It's difficult to process something like that in the moment." "That's generous of you, but it doesn't make it right." Tommy's voice softened. "Grandma, I want you to know something. Claire and I have been talking about this for months. Not tonight's disaster, but the way Jessica treats you. We've seen it. The little comments. The way she excludes you from conversations. How she redirects attention away from you at family gatherings. We should have said something sooner. The validation was both comforting and heartbreaking. You had your own wedding to plan, your own life to live. You're part of that life. You're part of our family's future, not its past, no matter what she says." Tommy paused again, and when he spoke, his voice was troubled. "Grandma, can I ask you something? Dad's been acting strange lately, stressed about money, which doesn't make sense with his promotion. He even asked Claire's parents if they knew anyone hiring in their firm's corporate division, like he was thinking about switching jobs. Does that sound normal to you?" Avery's financial advisor instincts sharpened to a razor's edge. David loved his work, had spent 15 years building his reputation at his current firm. The idea of him considering a lateral move, especially so soon after making senior partner, was deeply troubling. "Has he mentioned any specific financial concerns?" she asked carefully. "Not directly, but he's been talking about cash flow issues, something about unexpected expenses, and having to delay some investments he'd planned. When I asked Jessica about it at the rehearsal dinner, she just laughed and said men worry too much about money." Men worry too much about money. The phrase echoed in Avery's mind like a warning bell. In her 4 decades of financial planning, she'd learned that people who dismissed legitimate financial concerns often had something to hide. After promising Tommy she would be okay and assuring him that his wedding day hadn't been ruined despite Jessica's performance, Avery ended the call and sat in the growing dawn light, pieces of a puzzle beginning to form in her mind. She retrieved her old briefcase from the hall closet, the leather worn smooth from years of carrying client files and financial documents. Inside, she found her magnifying glass, calculator, and the legal pad she'd once used to track complex financial patterns. The tools felt familiar in her hands, like a craftsman picking up instruments after a long hiatus. Over the next hour, she began making notes. Jessica's expensive tastes, David's unexplained financial stress, the disconnect between his recent promotion and his apparent money troubles. She thought about Jessica's business, a marketing firm that seemed to generate enough income to support her lavish lifestyle, though Avery had never quite understood what services they provided or who their clients were. A memory surfaced from Christmas dinner 6 months ago. Jessica had been showing off photos from a business trip to Las Vegas, staying at the Bellagio, and dining at celebrity chef restaurants. When Sarah had asked about the client who'd paid for such luxury accommodations, Jessica had been vague, mentioning something about entertainment industry connections and relationship building. At the time, Avery had assumed it was the kind of business networking that required expensive venues to impress potential clients. Now, with her professional skepticism fully engaged, she wondered if there might be another explanation. Her neighbor's dog began barking as the sun crested the horizon, and Avery realized she'd been awake for over 24 hours. But despite her exhaustion, her mind felt clearer than it had in years. The humiliation of the previous evening had stripped away her grandmother persona, revealing the sharp analytical mind that had once helped dozens of clients protect their assets from financial predators. If Jessica thought she was dealing with a harmless old woman who would quietly fade into the background, she was about to learn otherwise. Avery Cole had spent her career following paper trails and uncovering financial deceptions. It was time to dust off those skills and find out exactly what her daughter-in-law was hiding. She pulled out her cell phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the name she was looking for, Elena Rodriguez. They hadn't spoken in over 2 years, not since the brief condolence call after Frank's funeral, but Elena had been more than just a professional colleague. She'd been a friend, and more importantly, she'd been someone who understood that sometimes the only way to protect the innocent was to expose the guilty. As she stared at Elena's number, Avery felt something she hadn't experienced since Frank's death, a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with being anyone's mother or grandmother or widow. For the first time in 3 years, she was simply Avery Cole, financial advisor and fraud investigator, and she had work to do. 3 days passed before Avery gathered the courage to make the call. She'd spent those days researching, making careful notes about Jessica's social media presence, and piecing together a timeline of expensive purchases that didn't align with what she knew about David's income. By Thursday morning, she could no longer ignore the growing certainty that her instincts were correct. Something was very wrong with Jessica's finances. Elena Rodriguez answered on the second ring, her voice carrying the same no-nonsense authority that had made her such an effective police detective 15 years ago. Elena Rodriguez Investigations. Elena? it's Avery Cole. I don't know if you remember me, but we worked together on the Pemberton embezzlement case and… Avery! Elena's voice warmed instantly. Of course I remember you. How are you holding up? I've thought about you often since Frank passed. The genuine concern in Elena's voice nearly broke Avery's resolve. She'd prepared herself for a professional conversation, not an emotional one. I'm DIL managing. Listen, Elena, I was wondering if we could meet for coffee. I have a situation I'd like to discuss with you. Personal or professional? Both, I'm afraid. Elena was quiet for a moment, and Avery could almost hear her mental wheels turning. Are you in trouble, Avery? Not exactly. But I think someone in my family might be. They arranged to meet at a small coffee shop in downtown Sacramento, far enough from Carmichael that Avery wouldn't risk running into anyone she knew. The grind was tucked between a used bookstore and a vintage clothing shop, the kind of place that attracted graduate students and freelance writers rather than suburban families. Avery arrived first, choosing a corner table that offered privacy and ordering a black coffee that reminded her of the endless cups she'd consumed during late-night fraud investigations. When Elena walked through the door 15 minutes later, Avery felt a shock of recognition mixed with surprise. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Elena had always been striking. Tall and lean with prematurely silver hair that she'd worn in a severe bun during her police days. Now that silver hung loose around her shoulders, and she moved with the confident stride of someone who answered to no one but herself. At 55, she looked better than she had at 40. You look good, Elena said, settling into the chair across from Avery with her own coffee, something elaborate with foam art that she ignored completely. Tired, but good. Better than I expected, honestly. You look amazing. Private investigation clearly agrees with you. Elena's smile turned wry. It pays better than police work, and I don't have to pretend to be nice to people who don't deserve it. Her expression grew serious. Now, tell me what's going on. And don't sugarcoat it. I can tell this isn't a social call. Avery had rehearsed this conversation, but sitting across from Elena, she found herself starting from the beginning. The wedding reception humiliation, Jessica's pattern of exclusion and subtle cruelties, David's unexplained financial stress, and her growing suspicions about her daughter-in-law's lifestyle and business practices. Elena listened without interruption, her dark eyes focused and analytical. When Avery finished, Elena sat back in her chair and studied her for a long moment. Let me make sure I understand, Elena said finally. Your daughter-in-law publicly humiliated you at your grandson's wedding, and now you want to investigate her finances because something doesn't add up? Put that way, it sounded petty and vindictive. Avery felt heat rise in her cheeks. I know how it sounds, but it sounds like you're listening to your professional instincts, Elena interrupted. The same instincts that helped us catch Marcus Pemberton before he could steal another $250,000 from his clients' retirement funds. She leaned forward, her expression intense. Tell me about the business. What kind of marketing firm does she run? That's just it. I'm not entirely sure. She mentions clients, talks about campaigns and strategies, but I've never seen any actual work product. Her social media shows her at expensive restaurants and events, always networking, but never any concrete results or testimonials from satisfied clients. Elena nodded slowly. And her partner? You mentioned someone named Bobby Kim? Robert Kim. He seems nervous whenever Jessica's business comes up in conversation. I got the impression he invested money in the firm, but he always looks uncomfortable when they discuss financial matters. Elena pulled out her phone and made a few notes. What about their tax situation? Joint filings? I know they filed jointly, but David mentioned some complications last year. Something about business expenses and deductions that their accountant had to sort out. Jessica handled all of that. She said David was too busy with his law practice to worry about the details. Elena's expression darkened. Avery, in my experience, when one spouse completely controls the financial narrative while the other partner shows signs of money stress despite a good income, there's usually a reason. She paused, seeming to weigh her words carefully. I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest. Is this about getting revenge for what she did to you, Or is this about protecting your family? The question hit Avery like a physical blow. She set down her coffee cup with shaking hands and stared at the table's scarred surface. I don't know, she admitted. Maybe both. Is that wrong? Wrong? Elena laughed, but there was no humor in it. Avery, 3 years ago, I lost my family's restaurant to a con artist who convinced my brother to invest our inheritance in a, quote, can't-miss development deal. By the time we realized what was happening, he'd disappeared with everything. The police said it was a civil matter. The lawyers said we had no recourse because my brother had signed the documents willingly. Elena, I had no idea. The point is, I understand exactly what you're feeling. The rage, the helplessness, the need to do something instead of just accepting that bad people sometimes win. Elena's voice was steady, but Avery could see old pain in her eyes. What I learned is that revenge and justice aren't mutually exclusive. Sometimes they're the same thing. Avery felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. So you'll help me? I'll help you find the truth. What you do with that truth is up to you. Elena pulled out a small notebook and pen. But first, we establish some ground rules. This is a professional investigation, not a personal vendetta. We follow the evidence wherever it leads, even if it clears Jessica completely. And if we find evidence of actual crimes, we report them to the appropriate authorities. Agreed. Good. Now let's start with the basics. I'll need Jessica's full name, date of birth if you have it, her business information, and anything else you can think of. Social security number would be ideal, but I'm guessing you don't have that. For the next hour, they methodically went through everything Avery knew about Jessica's background, business dealings, and lifestyle. Elena asked probing questions that revealed gaps in Avery's knowledge, important details that had never seemed significant before, but now felt crucial. Here's what we're going to do, Elena said as they prepared to leave. I'm going to run a comprehensive background check. Credit history, business filings, property records, the works. You're going to document everything you can observe about her spending patterns and business activities. And we're both going to keep our mouths shut about this until we know what we're dealing with. What about Bobby Kim? Let me handle him. If there's something hinky about their business relationship, he's either complicit or he's another victim. Either way, I'll know how to approach him. Elena stood and gathered her things. Avery, I want you to understand something. Once we start down this path, there's no going back. If Jessica is hiding something significant, exposing it will have consequences for your entire family. Avery thought about David's stressed expression, Tommy's wedding night ruined by cruelty, and the 3 years she'd spent rebuilding her life only to have it torn down in 3 minutes of public humiliation. I understand, she said. Let's find out who Jessica Cole really is. Elena's background check results arrived in Avery's email 3 days later, attached to a message that simply read, "Call me. We need to talk." The clinical tone was more unsettling than any dramatic revelation would have been. Avery printed the 15-page report in her home office, the printer's mechanical whirring the only sound in the morning quiet. As she read through Elena's findings, her coffee grew cold, and her professional skepticism transformed into genuine alarm. Jessica Williams, her maiden name, had a credit history that read like a masterclass in financial manipulation. She'd opened 17 credit cards in the past 5 years, maxed out 12 of them, and somehow managed to maintain an acceptable credit score through a complex web of balance transfers and minimum payments. More troubling were the business credit lines. 3 different LLCs registered under variations of Williams Marketing Solutions, each with substantial outstanding balances. When her phone rang an hour later, Avery was ready with questions. Elena, this report, the multiple business entities, the credit manipulation, this is sophisticated financial deception. It gets worse, Elena's voice was grim. I did some additional digging into her social media presence. Look at her Instagram from the past 18 months and tell me what you see. Avery opened Jessica's Instagram account on her laptop, scrolling through an endless parade of luxury experiences. Designer handbags photographed in natural light, dinner at restaurants where the wine list started at $300, weekend trips to Napa Valley, Carmel, and Las Vegas, always staying at 5-star hotels. The lifestyle doesn't match the business income, Avery said slowly. unless her marketing firm is significantly more successful than anyone realizes. That's what I thought too, until I looked into Williams Marketing Solutions. Avery, this woman is running a shell game. The business exists on paper, has a professional website, even lists Bobby Kim as a partner. But when I tried to verify their client base, I hit dead ends everywhere. Avery pulled up the company website on her computer. It looked professional enough, sleek design, compelling copy about innovative marketing strategies, and transformative brand experiences. The testimonials section featured glowing reviews from companies Avery had never heard of, and when she clicked on the portfolio section, she found beautifully designed case studies that somehow managed to say very little about actual results. Elena, I'm looking at their website now. It's all style and no substance. Exactly. And here's the kicker. I ran the supposed client companies through business databases. Half of them don't exist, and the other half are legitimate businesses that have never heard of Williams Marketing Solutions. Avery felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. So the entire business is fraudulent? Not entirely. They do have some legitimate clients. Mostly small businesses that paid for basic services like website design or social media management. But the revenue from those contracts wouldn't support Jessica's lifestyle for a month, let alone sustain it for years. Where is the money coming from then? That's what we need to figure out. I've identified several concerning patterns, but I need more information to connect the dots. Are you ready to get your hands dirty with some real detective work? Over the next 2 hours, Elena walked Avery through a systematic analysis of Jessica's digital footprint. They cross-referenced her social media posts with credit card statements that Elena had obtained through her investigative contacts, looking for patterns that might reveal the source of her funding. The results were damning. Jessica's posts consistently featured expensive purchases: a $3,000 Hermes scarf, dinner at Thomas Keller's restaurants, weekend getaways to luxury resorts, but the timing never aligned with any legitimate business income. Instead, the expenditures clustered around specific dates that corresponded with business credit card advances and mysterious deposits into her personal accounts. Look at this pattern, Avery said, pointing to her handwritten timeline. Major expenditures always happen within days of significant business credit transactions. She's using business credit to fund personal expenses. That's embezzlement if she's taking money that belongs to Bobby Kim as well, Elena confirmed. And it gets worse. I found evidence that she's been billing ghost clients for services never rendered, then pocketing the payments. Avery stared at the evidence spread across her dining room table. Financial documents, printed social media posts, and Elena's investigation notes painted a picture of systematic fraud that went far beyond personal overspending. This was deliberate, calculated theft. Elena, what about David? Could he be involved in this? I've been wondering the same thing. From everything I can tell, your son genuinely believes his wife runs a successful marketing business. The stress Tommy mentioned makes sense if David is starting to notice financial inconsistencies, but doesn't understand what's causing them. So he's a victim too. Probably. But Avery, there's something else we need to discuss. If Jessica is defrauding her business partner and clients, she's also likely committing tax fraud. The IRS takes a very dim view of unreported income and false business deductions. The implications hit Avery like a physical blow. If Jessica was filing joint tax returns with David while hiding income and falsifying business expenses, David could be held liable for her crimes. Her son's legal career, his reputation, his financial future, everything could be destroyed by Jessica's deception. We need to talk to Bobby Kim, Avery said quietly. I was hoping you'd say that. But approaching him requires finesse. If he's complicit, we don't want to tip him off. If he's innocent, we need to convince him to cooperate without scaring him into warning Jessica. Elena explained her strategy for contacting Bobby Kim. She would approach him under the pretense of investigating Williams Marketing Solutions for a potential client, using her legitimate private investigator credentials to request a business meeting. If Bobby was innocent, his responses to specific questions would reveal his ignorance of Jessica's schemes. If he was complicit, his defensive reactions would be equally telling. What do I do in the meantime? Avery asked. Keep documenting everything. Jessica's social media posts, any family conversations about money, anything David might mention about their financial situation. And Avery, be careful. If Jessica realizes she's being investigated, she might accelerate whatever scheme she's running or try to cover her tracks. That evening, as Avery organized the evidence they'd collected, she thought about the woman she'd tried so hard to accept as family. The Jessica who smiled at holiday dinners and played the role of devoted wife was the same person who had built an elaborate criminal enterprise designed to steal from anyone foolish enough to trust her. The realization brought an unexpected sense of clarity. This investigation was no longer about revenge for a public humiliation. It was about protecting her family from a predator who had infiltrated their lives with surgical precision. Jessica had chosen the wrong family to deceive, and she had definitely chosen the wrong grandmother to underestimate. Avery's phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Meeting with Bobby Kim tomorrow at 2 p.m. We'll call you afterward with updates. Good work today, partner." Partner. The word carried weight that had nothing to do with their professional relationship. For the first time since Frank's death, Avery felt like she belonged somewhere, like her skills and experience mattered to someone who understood their value. Jessica Cole was about to discover that some old women refused to fade quietly into the background. Elena arrived at Bobby Kim's office building in downtown Sacramento 15 minutes early, using the extra time to observe the modest suite that housed Williams Marketing Solutions. The reception area was professionally decorated but sparse, the kind of space that looked impressive in photographs but felt hollow in person. A young receptionist with perfectly applied makeup greeted her with the practiced enthusiasm of someone paid to be perpetually cheerful. "Mr. Kim is expecting you," the receptionist chirped, leading Elena down a short hallway to a corner office that revealed more about Bobby's character than any background check could have provided. Robert Bobby Kim was a slight man in his early 40s, with nervous energy that manifested in constant fidgeting and an inability to maintain direct eye contact for more than a few seconds. His office was meticulously organized, every pen in its proper place, every document filed with obsessive precision. Elena recognized the signs immediately. This was a man who controlled his environment because he felt powerless everywhere else. "Ms. Rodriguez, thank you for coming," Bobby said, half rising from his chair before settling back down awkwardly. "I have to admit, I'm not entirely sure why you wanted to meet. Your assistant mentioned something about a potential client interested in our services?" Elena settled into the chair across from his desk and pulled out her notebook, adopting the professional demeanor that had served her well during police interrogations. "Actually, Mr. Kim, I need to be completely honest with you. I'm not here about new business. I'm conducting a background investigation into Williams Marketing Solutions, and I was hoping you could help me understand the company's operations." The color drained from Bobby's face so rapidly that Elena worried he might faint. His hands began trembling, and he glanced toward the door as if considering an escape route. I don't understand. Are we in some kind of trouble? Because I've been very careful about all the documentation, and Jessica handles most of the client relationships. So if there's been a misunderstanding— Mr. Kim, Elena interrupted gently, "you're not in trouble. At least, not yet. But I think you might be able to help me understand some irregularities I've discovered in your business finances." Bobby's nervous laughter was high-pitched and desperate. "Irregularities? I'm sure there's a perfectly reasonable explanation for whatever you think you've found. Jessica is very thorough about record-keeping. She always says that attention to detail is what separates successful firms from amateur operations." Elena studied Bobby's face carefully. His body language screamed guilty knowledge, but his words suggested genuine confusion rather than deliberate deception. She decided to test her theory with a direct question. "Mr. Kim, when was the last time you personally reviewed the company's client billings?" "Well, Jessica handles most of the billing operations. She has more experience with client relations and—" Bobby trailed off, seeming to realize how his answer sounded. "Why do you ask?" "Because, according to my research, Williams Marketing Solutions has billed several companies for services that were never provided. Companies that claim they've never heard of your firm." The silence that followed was deafening. Bobby stared at Elena with the expression of a man watching his worst fears come to life. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Which companies?" Elena consulted her notes. Meridian Tech Solutions, Creative Dynamics LLC, and Pacific Northwest Consulting Group. Do those names sound familiar? Bobby closed his eyes and pressed his palms against his temples. Oh God, oh my God, I knew something was wrong. I've been trying to convince myself that I was being paranoid, but I knew. What did you know, Mr. Kim? The expenses. The credit card statements. Jessica always has explanations, but they never quite make sense. Bobby opened his eyes and looked directly at Elena for the first time. She's been using company credit cards for personal purchases, hasn't she? Among other things. Mr. Kim, I need you to understand something. If Williams Marketing Solutions has been defrauding clients or misusing investor funds, you could be held liable as a partner, even if you weren't directly involved in the schemes. Bobby's composure cracked completely. I invested my family's money in this business. My parents' retirement savings, money I'd set aside for my kids' college funds. If she's been stealing. He buried his face in his hands. Elena felt a familiar pang of sympathy mixed with professional calculation. Bobby Kim was clearly a victim, but he was also a potential witness who could provide crucial evidence. She needed to balance compassion with the investigation's needs. Mr. Kim, I know this is overwhelming, but I need to ask you some specific questions. Your answers could help protect other victims and might help you recover some of your losses. Over the next hour, Elena methodically drew out the details of Bobby's partnership with Jessica. The picture that emerged was both predictable and heartbreaking. Bobby had been introduced to Jessica through a mutual friend 2 years earlier, when she'd approached him with a seemingly irresistible business opportunity. Her marketing expertise, combined with his technical skills and investment capital, would create a powerhouse consultancy serving high-end clients. The partnership had started promisingly. Jessica brought in several legitimate clients and generated respectable revenue during their first 6 months. But gradually, Bobby noticed concerning patterns. Jessica became secretive about client communications, insisted on handling all financial transactions personally, and grew defensive when Bobby asked for detailed reports about their business operations. She always had explanations, Bobby said, his voice hollow with self-recrimination. Client confidentiality agreements that prevented her from sharing details. Unusual payment schedules that required flexible accounting. I wanted to believe her because the alternative was admitting that I'd been incredibly stupid. You weren't stupid, Mr. Kim. You were dealing with someone who specializes in financial manipulation. These schemes work because they target decent people who want to believe the best about others. Elena showed Bobby printed copies of the fraudulent client billings and credit card statements that revealed Jessica's personal spending patterns. With each document, Bobby's expression grew more devastated and more determined. What do I need to do? He asked finally. How do I help you stop her? First, you need to understand that cooperating with this investigation might expose your business to legal scrutiny. If Jessica has been filing false tax returns or submitting fraudulent documents to banks, you could face questions about your knowledge and involvement. I don't care about protecting myself anymore. My family's money is gone either way. But if I can help prevent her from doing this to other people. Bobby straightened in his chair, showing the first signs of backbone Elena had seen from him. Good. Here's what we're going to do. You're going to continue operating normally, while documenting everything Jessica does that seems suspicious. I'll provide you with specific things to look for and record. If she asks about this meeting, you'll tell her it was a potential client who decided not to move forward. Won't she be suspicious? Probably, but Jessica's arrogance works in our favor. She believes she's smarter than everyone around her, and that includes you. She'll assume you're too passive to cause her any real problems. As Elena prepared to leave, Bobby asked the question she'd been expecting. Ms. Rodriguez, how did you find out about all this? Who hired you to investigate Jessica? Elena paused at the door, considering how much to reveal. Let's just say that Jessica made the mistake of underestimating someone who doesn't take kindly to being underestimated. The drive back to Carmichael gave Elena time to process what she'd learned. Bobby Kim's cooperation would provide inside access to Jessica's ongoing schemes, but more importantly, his testimony would establish a pattern of deliberate fraud that went far beyond personal overspending. When she called Avery that evening, Elena's voice carried a satisfaction that had been missing from their previous conversations. "We've got her, Avery. And now we have someone on the inside to help us prove it." The evidence accumulated over the following weeks like sediment in a riverbed, layer upon layer of documentation that painted an increasingly damning picture of Jessica's criminal enterprise. Avery's dining room table had been transformed into a command center, covered with financial records, printed emails, and timeline charts that Elena updated during their twice-weekly meetings. Bobby Kim proved to be an invaluable asset, providing real-time intelligence about Jessica's activities while maintaining his facade of passive partnership. His daily reports revealed the sophisticated nature of Jessica's schemes, fabricated client projects that existed only on paper, elaborate expense reports that transformed personal luxuries into business necessities, and a complex web of shell companies designed to obscure the flow of stolen funds. "Look at this," Elena said, spreading Bobby's latest documentation across the table. Jessica billed Meridian Tech Solutions $12,000 for a social media campaign that never existed, then immediately transferred the money to her personal account to pay for that weekend in Carmel she posted about on Instagram. Avery studied the credit card statements with the methodical attention that had made her reputation as a financial advisor. The pattern is consistent: fictitious billings followed by immediate personal expenditures. But Elena, this represents at least $40,000 in fraud just from what we can document. How has she avoided detection for so long? Volume and misdirection. She keeps the individual amounts small enough to avoid triggering automatic fraud alerts, and she spaces them out across multiple accounts and business entities. It's actually quite sophisticated. The complexity of Jessica's crimes was both impressive and deeply troubling. Each new revelation forced Avery to confront how completely she had misjudged her daughter-in-law's character and capabilities. The woman who smiled at family dinners and complained about difficult clients was actually a master manipulator who had built her entire lifestyle on systematic theft. But, as the evidence mounted, so did Avery's internal conflict about the investigation's ultimate purpose. The moment of reckoning came during an unexpected visit from Sarah, who arrived at Avery's house on a Thursday afternoon, looking uncharacteristically distressed. "Mom, we need to talk about David," Sarah said without preamble, accepting the cup of tea Avery offered but leaving it untouched on the coffee table. "I'm worried about him." Really worried. Avery felt her chest tighten with anxiety. "What's wrong? Is he sick?" "Not physically, but mentally. He's falling apart. He came to my office yesterday asking if I could recommend a therapist who specializes in financial anxiety. He says he can't sleep, can't concentrate at work, and feels like he's drowning in debt despite making more money than ever before." The description hit Avery like a physical blow. David's suffering was a direct result of Jessica's crimes, but it was also a consequence of the investigation that Avery had initiated. By uncovering the truth about Jessica's schemes, she was inadvertently exposing David to the devastating reality of his wife's betrayal. "Did he give you any specifics about their financial situation?" Avery asked carefully. "He mentioned unexpected business expenses, problems with their tax filings, and some issues with Jessica's marketing firm that he doesn't understand but is somehow responsible for." Sarah leaned forward, her professional composure cracking. "Mom, I've never seen him like this. He's always been the strong one, the one who handles problems and takes care of everyone else. Now he looks broken." Avery excused herself to refill their tea, using the moment in the kitchen to compose herself and consider how much to reveal. Sarah's visit was a stark reminder that exposing Jessica's crimes would devastate David, regardless of his innocence. The man she was trying to protect would suffer tremendously when the truth emerged. When she returned to the living room, Sarah was studying the financial documents that Avery had hastily covered with a magazine. "Mom, what are all these papers?" "This looks like some kind of investigation." The moment of truth had arrived sooner than Avery had anticipated. She sat down across from her daughter and made a decision that would change everything. "Sarah, I need to tell you something, and I need you to promise me you'll listen to the whole story before you react." Over the next hour, Avery revealed the entire investigation: Jessica's public humiliation, the suspicious financial patterns, Elena's background research, Bobby Kim's cooperation, and the mounting evidence of systematic fraud. Sarah listened with the focused attention of a trained therapist, asking clarifying questions but withholding judgment until Avery finished. "My God, Mom. This explains so much about David's behavior lately." Sarah picked up one of the credit card statements, studying the charges with growing anger. "She's been using their joint accounts to cover her business expenses, hasn't she? That's why David feels responsible for debts he doesn't understand." "We believe so. The tax implications alone could destroy his career, even though he's completely innocent." Sarah was quiet for several minutes, processing the information with clinical detachment before her emotional reaction emerged. "I can't believe I'm saying this, but part of me is relieved. David's been so stressed and confused that I was starting to worry he was having some kind of breakdown. At least now we know there's a real cause. Sarah, I need you to understand something. This investigation started as a response to what Jessica did to me at Tommy's wedding, but it's become something else entirely. If we expose her crimes, David will be devastated. His marriage will end, his finances will be in ruins, and he'll have to live with the knowledge that he was completely deceived by someone he loved. And if you don't expose her crimes, she'll continue stealing from innocent people while David sinks deeper into financial and emotional chaos," Sarah replied. "Mom, this isn't about revenge anymore. It's about protecting David from further damage and stopping Jessica before she destroys more lives." That evening, after Sarah left with promises to monitor David's mental state while maintaining secrecy about the investigation, Avery called Elena with updates about the family dynamics. "Elena, I'm starting to question whether we're doing the right thing. David is suffering, and exposing Jessica's crimes will only make it worse in the short term. Avery, I've been investigating financial crimes for 15 years, and I've learned something important. The victims who suffer the most are the ones who discover the truth too late to minimize the damage. David is going to find out about Jessica's schemes eventually, either through our investigation or when the IRS comes knocking. At least this way, he'll have family support and legal preparation. But what if he never forgives me for destroying his marriage? What if he never forgives you for letting Jessica destroy his life when you could have stopped it?" The conversation continued late into the night, with Elena presenting evidence that Jessica's schemes were accelerating. Recent credit applications suggested she was running out of traditional funding sources and might be preparing for increasingly desperate measures. "Avery, we're at a critical juncture. We have enough evidence to expose Jessica's crimes, but if we wait much longer, she might disappear with whatever money she can grab, leaving David holding the bag for everything." As Avery hung up the phone, she realized that her moral struggles were a luxury she could no longer afford. Jessica's crimes weren't theoretical anymore. They were actively destroying David's life and potentially harming innocent clients who trusted Williams' marketing solutions. The time for hesitation was over. Tomorrow, she would commit fully to exposing Jessica's criminal enterprise, regardless of the personal cost to herself or her family. Some battles chose you, and this was one fight where surrender was not an option. The evidence file had grown to 3 inches thick by the time Avery and Elena spread its contents across the conference table at Elena's office. Bank statements, credit reports, fabricated invoices, and Bobby Kim's documentation created an overwhelming mosaic of financial fraud that would have impressed even the most seasoned white-collar crime prosecutor. "We have her dead to rights," Elena said, organizing the documents into chronological order. "Embezzlement, tax fraud, wire fraud, identity theft. Jessica's looking at serious federal charges if we turn this over to the authorities." Avery studied the timeline they'd constructed, each entry representing another layer of deception that had grown more audacious over time. "The question is whether we approach David first, go directly to law enforcement, or confront Jessica ourselves. Each option has risks. If we tell David first, he might warn Jessica out of misplaced loyalty. If we go to the FBI, they'll want to build their own case from scratch, which could take months while Jessica continues stealing. But if we confront Jessica directly, She might panic and destroy evidence, or worse, disappear with whatever money she can access, Avery finished. None of the options are ideal. Their strategic planning was interrupted by Avery's phone, buzzing with a text from Tommy. "Grandma, can you call me? Something weird is happening with Dad." Avery excused herself to return the call, stepping into Elena's private office for privacy. Tommy's voice carried an urgency that immediately put her on alert. "Grandma, Dad called me this morning asking if I could lend him $20,000. He says it's for a temporary cash flow problem with Jessica's business, but he sounded desperate. When I asked for details, he got defensive and said I wouldn't understand the complexities of running a marketing firm." The news hit Avery like a physical blow. Jessica's schemes were escalating, and she was now directly manipulating David to extract money from their family members. "Did you agree to lend him the money?" "I told him I needed to talk to Claire first, which bought me some time. But Grandma, he's never asked me for money before. Ever." And the way he sounded, scared almost. Like something terrible would happen if he couldn't get the money quickly. After assuring Tommy that he should not lend David the money under any circumstances, Avery returned to Elena with a new sense of urgency. Jessica's crimes were no longer abstract financial manipulations. She was actively exploiting David's love for his family to expand her theft. "She's getting desperate," Elena said after hearing about Tommy's call. "Asking family members for money suggests she's running out of traditional funding sources. This kind of escalation usually precedes either a major theft or a disappearance." "We can't wait any longer," Avery said with sudden clarity. "David is being used as a weapon against his own family. If we don't act now, Jessica will continue manipulating him to steal from Tommy, Sarah, and probably me next." Elena nodded grimly. "So we confront her directly, but we do it smart. Controlled environment, documented conversation, and with enough evidence to prevent her from talking her way out of the situation." They spent the next 2 hours developing a comprehensive confrontation strategy. Elena would contact Jessica under the pretense of investigating Williams' marketing solutions for a potential client, requesting a meeting at the firm's office. The familiar environment would make Jessica feel confident and in control, while the business context would provide cover for the kinds of detailed questions they needed to ask. "The key is to present the evidence methodically," Elena explained, giving her opportunities to confess or provide explanations before revealing the full scope of what we know. If she's smart, she'll realize that cooperation might be her only option. And if she's not smart, then we document her lies and turn everything over to federal prosecutors. Their planning was interrupted by another call, this time from Sarah, whose voice carried the controlled panic of a therapist who had encountered something beyond her professional experience. "Mom, David just called me asking for a loan of $30,000. When I pressed him for details, he broke down crying and said Jessica's business is in crisis and they might lose everything. He's talking about taking a second mortgage on their house to cover what he calls temporary operational expenses." The escalation was even worse than Avery had feared. Jessica wasn't just stealing from existing sources. She was positioning David to risk their home and future to fund her criminal enterprise. "Sarah, you cannot lend him that money under any circumstances," Avery said firmly. "I know it's difficult, but you need to trust me on this." "Mom, what aren't you telling me?" David sounded genuinely terrified, and if there's something I should know about Jessica's business problems. Avery made a decision that would accelerate everything. "Sarah, I need you to come to Elena's office immediately. There are things you need to see before David does something that destroys his financial future permanently." An hour later, Sarah sat in stunned silence as Avery and Elena presented the complete evidence file. Her reaction progressed through disbelief, anger, and finally a cold professional assessment that reminded Avery of her daughter's therapeutic training. "She's a sociopath," Sarah said quietly, studying Jessica's fabricated client testimonials. The level of manipulation required to maintain these deceptions while living with David. It's not just criminal, it's pathological. The question now is how we protect David while ensuring Jessica faces consequences for her crimes, Elena said. "Your brother is being used as a tool to expand her theft. and every day we delay gives her more opportunities to manipulate him into financial decisions that could ruin his life. Sarah was quiet for several minutes, apparently weighing options with the same methodical approach she used in therapy sessions. When she spoke, her voice carried new determination. "We confront Jessica tomorrow, but we also prepare David for the aftermath. I'm going to arrange an emergency therapy session with him tonight, ostensibly to help with his financial anxiety. If I can get him to verbalize his fears and concerns, it might help him process the truth when it comes out." That's risky, Elena warned. If David suspects something and warns Jessica, David won't warn her because he doesn't understand what he'd be warning her about. But if he's in a better mental state when the truth emerges, he'll be more likely to make rational decisions instead of reactive ones. They finalized their plans with military precision. Elena would call Jessica in the morning to schedule an afternoon meeting at Williams Marketing Solutions. Sarah would meet with David that evening to assess his psychological state and begin preparing him for potential revelations about his marriage. And Avery would spend the night reviewing every piece of evidence one final time, ensuring they were prepared for any defense Jessica might attempt. As they prepared to leave Elena's office, Avery felt a mixture of anticipation and dread that reminded her of the moments before major financial fraud cases went to trial. Tomorrow would determine whether Jessica Cole faced justice for her crimes or managed to escape with the lives and fortunes she had stolen. Elena, what if she confesses and begs for mercy? What if she promises to make restitution and disappear from our lives forever? Elena's expression was granite hard. Then we'll know she's learned nothing from this experience, and we'll simply find new victims to exploit. Some people can't be reformed, Avery. They can only be stopped. Avery arrived at Williams Marketing Solutions 15 minutes before her scheduled appointment, using the time to observe the office building's modest lobby and rehearse her opening statements one final time. The leather portfolio in her hands contained 3 inches of meticulously organized evidence: financial records, fraudulent invoices, credit reports, and Bobby Kim's sworn statement detailing Jessica's systematic theft. Elena had called that morning with a simple message. She took the bait. Jessica agreed to meet with you about family reconciliation at 2 p.m. She sounded almost giddy about the prospect of you apologizing. The receptionist, the same young woman Elena had encountered weeks earlier, greeted Avery with professional courtesy tinged with curiosity. "Mrs. Cole? Jessica is expecting you. Please, follow me." Jessica's corner office was a study in calculated image management. Expensive furniture that looked impressive in photographs, awards from organizations Avery had never heard of, and a wall of framed testimonials from the fictional clients Elena had investigated. Jessica herself sat behind an oversized desk wearing a cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. "Avery!" Jessica's smile was radiant, her voice warm with what seemed like genuine pleasure. "I'm so glad you called. I've been feeling terrible about the misunderstanding at Tommy's wedding." Misunderstanding. The casual reframing of her public humiliation was breathtaking in its audacity, but Avery maintained her composed exterior as she settled into the chair across from Jessica's desk. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me, Jessica. I've been doing a lot of thinking about our relationship and the family's future." "Of course. Family is everything, isn't it? I know we've had our little tensions, but I truly believe we can work through them." Jessica leaned forward with practiced sincerity. "I have to admit, I was surprised when you suggested meeting here at the office, but I thought it might be nice for you to see what David and I have built together." The phrase, "what David and I have built together," hung in the air like a challenge. Avery opened her portfolio and withdrew the first document, a timeline of Williams Marketing Solutions' supposed client projects. "Actually, Jessica, I wanted to discuss your business with you. As a former financial advisor, I find it fascinating. Could you tell me about some of your recent successes?" Jessica's smile became slightly strained. but she launched into a polished presentation about their quote 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 quote. She spoke campaigns who had never heard existed, and clients who had never heard of her firm. That's very impressive, Avery said when Jessica finished. I'd love to hear more about Meridian Tech Solutions. Their testimonial on your website is quite compelling. The first crack appeared in Jessica's facade, a momentary flicker of uncertainty before her confident mask reasserted itself. Meridian Tech is one of our flagship clients. They've been with us for over a year now. Really? Avery withdrew a printed email from her portfolio. That's interesting, because I spoke with Meridian Tech's CEO yesterday. According to him, they've never heard of Williams Marketing Solutions. The silence that followed was deafening. Jessica stared at the email as if it might spontaneously combust, her practiced composure beginning to fragment around the edges. There must be some confusion. Perhaps you spoke with someone who wasn't familiar with our account relationship. Avery placed a second document on the desk, a bank statement showing Jessica's $12,000 payment from the fictional Meridian Tech project, followed immediately by personal charges at luxury retailers. No confusion, Jessica. Meridian Tech Solutions doesn't exist. Neither does Creative Dynamics LLC or Pacific Northwest Consulting Group. But you've billed all of them for services never rendered, then used that money to fund your personal lifestyle. Jessica's face cycled through a remarkable range of expressions: surprise, calculation, defiance, and finally a cold fury that revealed her true nature. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, Avery, but this isn't a game. Avery's voice remained steady as she continued placing documents on the desk. This is systematic fraud. You've stolen at least $60,000 from your business partner, filed false tax returns, and used David's name on fraudulent credit applications. You have no idea what you're talking about, Jessica snapped, her careful diction slipping into something sharper and more desperate. Bobby invested in this business willingly, and every tax filing has been prepared by licensed professionals. Licensed professionals working with fabricated information that you provided. Avery placed Bobby Kim's signed statement on top of the growing pile. Your partner has been documenting your crimes for weeks. Wire transfers, forged invoices, personal expenses charged to business accounts. It's all here. Jessica's mask finally shattered completely. She stood abruptly, her chair rolling backward as she leaned across the desk with naked hostility. You vindictive old bitch! This is about the wedding, isn't it? You can't stand that someone finally told you the truth about your pathetic existence. The truth? Avery's voice carried decades of professional authority. Let me tell you the truth, Jessica. You're a common thief who's been using my son as a shield for your criminal enterprise. You've manipulated David into believing he's responsible for debts that don't exist while you've stolen money from innocent people. David chose me. Jessica's voice rose to near shrieking levels. He chose me over his pathetic mother, who couldn't even handle her husband's death without falling apart. You think exposing this will bring him back to you? He'll never forgive you for destroying his marriage. Avery felt the words hit their intended target, but her voice remained calm. Perhaps not, but at least he'll be free from a woman who's been using him to commit federal crimes. Federal crimes? Jessica laughed, but the sound was brittle and desperate. You think you can intimidate me with legal threats? I'm married to a lawyer, remember. I know exactly what you can and cannot prove. Then you know that wire fraud, tax evasion, and embezzlement are federal offenses that carry substantial prison sentences. Avery stood and began collecting her documents. You also know that your husband could be held liable for crimes committed using joint financial accounts and tax filings. The mention of David's potential liability seemed to shock Jessica back to a semblance of rationality. What do you want? I want you to confess your crimes to David, make full restitution to your victims, and surrender yourself to federal authorities. Jessica's laugh was genuinely amused this time. And if I refuse? Then these documents go to the FBI field office this afternoon, along with Bobby Kim's testimony and a complete financial analysis of your fraudulent schemes. Avery paused at the door. Either way, Jessica, your criminal enterprise ends today. The only question is whether you face the consequences with a shred of dignity or force your victims to drag you through a public trial. You'll destroy David's life, Jessica said, her voice carrying a note of genuine desperation for the first time. No, Jessica, you already did that. I'm just preventing you from making it worse. As Avery walked through the reception area toward the elevator, she heard Jessica's voice echoing from the office. Not words, but a sound of pure fury that confirmed everything Elena had said about cornered predators becoming dangerous. The confrontation was over, but Avery knew the real battle was just beginning. Jessica Cole now understood that her carefully constructed criminal enterprise was collapsing, and desperate people in desperate situations rarely surrendered quietly. Avery's phone started ringing before she reached her car in the Williams Marketing Solutions parking lot. David's name flashed on the screen, and she could hear shouting in the background before she even answered. Mom, what the hell did you do? David's voice was raw with panic and fury. Jessica is hysterical, talking about FBI investigations and federal crimes. She says you threatened her with prison. David, where are you right now? I'm at Jessica's office. She called me screaming about some insane accusations you made. Mom, please tell me you haven't lost your mind and started making up stories about David. Listen to me very carefully. Get in your car and drive to Sarah's office immediately. Don't take Jessica with you, don't let her access any computers or financial accounts, and don't discuss anything with her until you've seen the evidence I'm about to show you. Evidence? What evidence? Mom, you're scaring me. The desperation in her son's voice broke Avery's heart. But there was no gentle way to shatter someone's world. The evidence that your wife has been systematically defrauding her business clients and using your joint accounts to hide the proceeds. David, Jessica is a criminal, and she's been using you to legitimize her crimes. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds before David spoke again, his voice hollow. That's impossible. You must have misunderstood something. Jessica runs a successful marketing firm. We've been stressed about cash flow, but that's normal for small businesses. David, meet me at Sarah's office in 1 hour. Bring your tax returns from the past 2 years and any documentation you have about Jessica's business operations. After you see what I've discovered, you can decide for yourself what's possible. Avery ended the call and immediately dialed Elena, who answered on the first ring. How did it go? She knows we have her, but she's not surrendering quietly. I think we need to contact the authorities immediately, before she has time to destroy evidence or disappear. Already on it. I have a contact at the FBI's Sacramento field office who specializes in financial crimes. Special Agent Patricia Chen. No relation to your family, despite the name. She's expecting our call. The next hour passed in a whirlwind of activity. Elena delivered their complete evidence file to Agent Chen, while Avery drove to Sarah's therapy office. her mind racing through the conversation she would need to have and the devastation they would cause. Sarah had cleared her afternoon schedule and prepared her office for what she grimly described as the most difficult family session of my career. When David arrived, he looked like a man who had aged 5 years in the past hour, pale, shaken, and carrying a cardboard box of financial documents with hands that trembled visibly. "Mom, before we start, I need you to know that if this is some kind of revenge plot against Jessica for what happened at Tommy's wedding." "David, sit down and look at the evidence before you say another word." Avery's voice carried the authority that had once commanded boardrooms full of skeptical executives. "After you've seen everything, if you still think this is about personal revenge, we'll never speak of it again." For the next 2 hours, Avery and Sarah methodically walked David through the evidence Elena had compiled. Bank statements showing impossible income patterns, fabricated client testimonials, credit reports revealing Jessica's network of fraudulent business entities, and Bobby Kim's detailed documentation of her systematic theft. David's reaction progressed through predictable stages. Denial gave way to confusion, confusion to horrified understanding, and understanding to a rage so profound that Sarah had to intervene when he started throwing financial documents across the room. "She used me," he said finally, his voice breaking. "Every tax return I signed, every business account I co-signed for, every time she asked me to cover temporary expenses, I was helping her steal from people." "You were a victim, not an accomplice," Avery said gently. "Jessica is very good at manipulation. She chose you because you're honest and trusting, qualities that made you the perfect shield for her crimes." "But I should have seen it. The expensive clothes, the luxury trips, the way she always deflected questions about her business operations. God, how could I have been so stupid?" Sarah leaned forward in her therapist voice. "David, sociopaths are expert manipulators. They identify their targets' psychological vulnerabilities and exploit them systematically. Your desire for family harmony and your guilt about Dad's death made you susceptible to someone who presented herself as a solution to family conflict. Their family crisis was interrupted by a call from Elena. Avery, you need to know that Special Agent Chen has obtained warrants for Jessica's arrest and the seizure of Williams Marketing Solutions' financial records. They're moving fast because Jessica tried to access the business bank accounts an hour ago, probably to transfer whatever money she could grab." The news that Jessica was actively trying to steal more money galvanized David in a way that hours of evidence presentation had not. "She's still stealing? Even after being confronted?" "It gets worse," Elena continued. "Agent Chen discovered that Jessica filed for 3 new business credit lines yesterday, using forged documents that list you as a guarantor. If those applications had been approved, you would have been liable for another $100,000 in fraudulent debt." David's face went white. "She was planning to destroy me financially and disappear. Most likely, Agent Chen wants to meet with you tomorrow to get your statement and discuss victim protection services. David, I'm sorry, but you're going to need a criminal defense attorney, even though you're a victim in this case." The implications of David's involvement, however innocent, began to sink in for the entire family. His legal career could survive criminal charges that were ultimately dismissed, but the scandal and financial devastation would affect all of them. That evening, as news of Jessica's arrest spread through their social circle, the family gathered at Avery's house for what felt like a wake. Tommy and Claire came immediately, offering support and expressing guilt for not recognizing Jessica's true nature sooner. Sarah coordinated with David's hastily hired attorney and helped him navigate the initial police interviews. "Grandma," Tommy said during a quiet moment on Avery's back patio, I need to thank you for doing this. I know it couldn't have been easy to investigate your own family. I didn't have a choice, sweetheart. Jessica was using all of us, and it would have gotten worse if we hadn't stopped her. Dad's gonna be okay, isn't he? I mean, legally? Avery looked through the sliding glass door at her son, who sat at her kitchen table staring blankly at legal documents, while Sarah talked quietly on the phone with federal prosecutors. David had lost weight in the past few hours, his face gaunt with the realization that his marriage had been an elaborate criminal conspiracy. Your father is strong, and he's innocent. It will take time, but he'll recover from this. Avery paused, watching David's shoulders shake with what might have been sobs or laughter. We all will. But even as she spoke the words, Avery wondered if some wounds could ever fully heal, or if the best they could hope for was learning to live with the scars. 6 months after Jessica's arrest, Tommy and Claire's modest dining room felt worlds away from the opulent wedding reception where everything had begun. The anniversary dinner they were hosting bore no resemblance to the elaborate celebration that had introduced Jessica Cole into their family story. This gathering was intimate, authentic, and marked by the kind of genuine warmth that could only exist between people who had survived genuine crisis together. Avery arrived carrying a bottle of Frank's favorite wine, one she'd been saving for a special occasion. Tonight felt worthy of the tribute. David was already there, looking healthier than he had in months, his face having regained some of the color that stress and betrayal had drained away. Sarah sat beside him with the protective posture of a sister who had helped shepherd her brother through the darkest period of his life. How are you feeling about the sentencing hearing next week? Claire asked David as they settled around the table, her voice carrying the careful concern of someone who had learned to navigate conversations about ongoing legal proceedings. Relieved, mostly, David replied, his voice stronger than it had been during the early weeks after Jessica's arrest. The prosecutor says Jessica's plea agreement will likely result in 4 to 6 years in federal prison, plus full restitution to her victims. It's not enough to undo the damage she caused, but it's something. The plea agreement had been a small mercy in an otherwise devastating legal process. Jessica's cooperation with federal investigators had revealed the full scope of her criminal enterprise. Over $200,000 stolen from clients, business partners, and family members through an elaborate network of fraudulent schemes that stretched back nearly 3 years. Bobby Kim stopped by my office last week, Elena said, joining the conversation after arriving fashionably late with a bouquet of flowers from her garden. He's doing better. The restitution payments won't make him whole, but his new consulting business is starting to turn a profit. Elena had become a regular presence at family gatherings, her role evolving from professional investigator to trusted family friend. Her dry humor and unwavering loyalty had provided stability during the chaos of Jessica's arrest, trial, and the media attention that followed. I still can't believe how long she fooled all of us, Tommy said, refilling wine glasses with the careful attention of someone determined to create perfect moments. The fake client testimonials, the fabricated business relationships. It was like she created an entire fictional universe around herself. Sociopaths are remarkably good at creating believable lies, Sarah observed, with the clinical detachment she developed to discuss Jessica's psychological profile. The scariest part wasn't the complexity of her schemes, but how effortlessly she maintained them while living with David. Most people can't sustain that level of deception in intimate relationships. David was quiet for a moment, staring at his wine glass with an expression that Avery had learned to recognize as his processing face. You know what haunts me the most? It's not the money or the legal problems or even the public humiliation. It's wondering if anything about our relationship was real. Did she ever actually love me? Or was I just a useful tool for legitimizing her crimes? The question hung in the air with the weight of months of therapy and self-recrimination. It was Sarah who answered, her voice gentle but firm. David, that question assumes love and manipulation are mutually exclusive. Jessica might have felt genuine affection for you while still using you to commit crimes. Sociopaths aren't incapable of all emotion. They're just incapable of prioritizing other people's welfare over their own desires. In other words, Elena added with characteristic bluntness, she probably did love you in her own twisted way. She just loved stealing more. The comment drew a surprised laugh from David, the first genuine laughter Avery had heard from him since Jessica's arrest. It was a small breakthrough, but significant enough that Sarah made a note in the mental file she'd been keeping about her brother's recovery progress. Speaking of recovery, Tommy said, clearly eager to shift the conversation toward more positive territory. Grandma, Elena told me you're thinking about going back to work? Avery felt her cheeks warm slightly. Not work exactly, but I've been talking with Elena about starting a consulting practice focused on helping fraud victims recover their assets. There's apparently a real need for financial advisors who understand both the emotional and practical challenges of rebuilding after financial crimes. The idea had emerged during one of her regular coffee meetings with Elena, born from Avery's realization that her experience investigating Jessica had reawakened skills and instincts she'd thought were permanently retired. More importantly, it had given her a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with being anyone's mother or grandmother or widow. That's wonderful, Mom, Sarah said with genuine enthusiasm. You were always at your best when you were helping people solve complex problems. The best part, Elena added with a mischievous smile, is that Avery's already attracted her first client. Remember Mrs. Henderson from Tommy's wedding? Turns out, her financial advisor has been charging excessive fees and making questionable investment decisions. She wants Avery to investigate. David raised his wine glass in a mock toast. To my mother, the family's resident fraud investigator. Jessica picked the wrong grandmother to mess with. The toast was echoed around the table, and for a moment, Avery felt the kind of familial warmth that had been missing since Frank's death. Not the desperate harmony she'd tried to create through accommodation and silence, but the genuine connection that came from weathering genuine hardship together. As the evening wound down and they moved to the living room for coffee and dessert, David found a moment to speak with Avery privately. Mom, I owe you an apology that's about 6 months overdue. David, no, let me say this. When Jessica humiliated you at the wedding, I should have defended you immediately. When you tried to warn me about her behavior, I should have listened instead of dismissing your concerns. And when you uncovered her crimes, I should have thanked you instead of accusing you of vindictive revenge plotting. Avery studied her son's face, seeing not just maturity, but genuine wisdom earned through painful experience. You were trying to protect your marriage and maintain family peace. Those are admirable instincts, even when they're misapplied. They were cowardly instincts, David corrected. I enabled Jessica's abuse of our family because confronting it would have required me to acknowledge that my judgment was catastrophically wrong. And now? David smiled with something approaching his old confidence. Now I know that my mother is tougher, smarter, and more protective than I ever gave her credit for. Jessica thought she was dealing with a harmless old woman, but she was actually up against a retired financial advisor with 40 years of fraud investigation experience, and absolutely nothing left to lose. As they rejoined the family group, Avery reflected on the question that had haunted her throughout the investigation, whether justice could truly heal wounds or simply transfer pain elsewhere. The answer, she'd learned, was more complex than she'd expected. Jessica's imprisonment hadn't restored David's marriage or erased the financial damage she'd caused. The family's healing had required months of difficult conversations, professional therapy, and the gradual rebuilding of trust that had been shattered by deception. But tonight, Surrounded by people who valued truth over comfort and loyalty over convenience, Avery felt something she hadn't experienced since Frank's death. She belonged somewhere not because of her role or function, but because of who she was. Some wounds did leave permanent scars, but growth and deeper understanding were not only possible, they were inevitable for people brave enough to face hard truths together. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Quote.